The Louisiana Special School District's Board of Directors meeting, May 16th, 2023. Part 2 of 2. A link to Part 1 is in the video's description.
Okay, thank you all. I appreciate you all, the hard workers here who provided us lunch, and we're gonna also help us get the meeting going and working so far around. And roll call for them. Ronnie Morris.
Present.
Bandit Faircourt. Michelle Jones. Sherry Crosby.
Here.
Anthony Celestine.
Here.
Kenny Davis.
Here.
Maria Anderson here.
Here.
Everyone else is not here.
So there's a person
I think we
needed.
left off with
Does that satisfy form?
Yes.
yes, sir. Thank you. See, we finished 5A, now we go to 5B, business consideration of specific performance objectives for the SSD superintendent for contract year 2023-24. Are we going to discuss this?
I'd like to offer a motion that we accept the rubric that was provided with regards to a qualitative assessment for the superintendent's performance, and recommend that the board officer work with the superintendent to develop a quantitative assessment that will be focused on student academic achievement goals.
Ms. Carr, did you get the motion?
I did, to work on quantitative, to add quantitative measures.
For purposes of establishing goals for student academic achievement.
Okay. She got it. Okay, I need a second to Mr. Moore's motion. And normally I would repeat it, but it's so long. Mr. Celestine seconded it. Oh, did I pronounce it? Okay. I have a motion from Mr. Morris, seconded by Mr. Celestine, to accept the rubrics and condense it as provided to us. Any opposition? Seeing none, requires it. Thank you. Five, six. Consideration of delegation of SSD Board of Directors authority concerning the adoption of SSD policy. We all received that in our email. Did you all have a chance to read it?
I got the email. This is Skinny. I got the email, but I can't remember what the policies were exactly. I do not have it printed here so that I can review it.
I think it's to have taken to the superintendent.
I don't believe we have copies of
Making
that.
sure that I'm on the same authority. This is the same paper that you have.
Where is
It
that?
starts with whereas the Board of Directors of the Special School District
Is
is
this
the
the one?
governing authority of, yes.
Mary, is this the one? This is Kenny. The draft, it says draft on it? Okay, no, that's not it. Is it the one that says evaluation? I'm not seeing any policies in my packet.
Maybe we could get some help from the superintendent on this one.
Katie, there's no policies that we're actually voting on today. It's a resolution to delegate the authority to draft and enact those policies to the superintendent. So that's what the actual motion, the consideration is to delegate that authority to me so that we can start getting policies in place where we're lacking them currently.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions, Chair?
I understand that the superintendent wants us to delegate to him to develop the policies. After you develop the policies, will you bring it to the board for us to review?
So yes, ultimately you will review all of the policies. What I'm asking though for is the delegation to develop them and enact them until you have a chance to review. So you'll always have a chance to review the policies, and then we can make any changes that the board sees fit. But right now, we have hardly any policies in place, and because we meet on a quarterly basis, we're essentially flying by the seat of our pants here, and we don't have solid policies to hang our hats on with regards to things. So yes, you will always, all policies that will be developed and acted will be sent to the board for your review, and then at the next board meeting, if we need to make any changes to those policies, then we can consider the changes at that point. But essentially what I'm asking for is the delegation to develop the policy. Once I sign it, we're following that policy until the next board meeting. And if there's any changes that you need to make, then we can do that.
Okay. So I make a motion that the board gives you the authority to develop the SSD policies.
Move that we delegate to Dr. Martin, to give Dr. Martin to the superintendent to develop SSD policies. Is that right?
Yes, give him the authority to develop the SSD policies.
We need a second. We need a second to Cherry's motion to delegate the authority to Dr. Martin.
You say again? Chair made a motion to give Dr. Martin authority to develop the SSD policies. I second it. Mrs. Kenny?
Any second it? Any opposition?
We have to have discussion first.
Okay.
I don't think we received that in the email. Is that a resolution? Is that what we're voting on?
Yes, ma'am.
Did we receive that in an email?
Yes, ma'am.
We all received it in an email?
The resolution was developed by the board council, so I don't know who it came from. But
Did y'all see that resolution in the email? You did? Okay. I don't have any opposition as it was presented.
I just don't come up with no original.
I couldn't.
No opposition. No, she was just discussing.
We'll give her a few minutes to read it.
So the last part of it, item 3, it said, so it's basically giving all such policies shall be provided by the superintendent to the board captions at the directors at the time of adoption, and the board retains the right to recall, reconsider, rescind, or otherwise enforce of any such policies adopted by the superintendent. So it seems like that process would be that the superintendent would send it to us when he adopts it, but the board would have the right to act in a different way when it's placed on the agenda for consideration. But these policies may never be placed on the agenda if you just implement it. Is that correct? Can you just clarify that?
Yes, sir.
I believe the way that it is written, then, so after we adopt the policy and I sign it into effect, a copy would be sent to the board. If any board member had an issue with that policy, then it would be put on the agenda for the next board meeting to discuss and make modifications as needed. That's the way I understood it.
Okay, and so how does the public know about these policies? Are they placed on our school board website?
How does the public know?
Right, because you would send it to us as board members, but if I'm a parent who sends my child to the school.
So that all the policies will be placed on the school's website. Yeah, so we'll have a policy section in the school's website where all of the policies will be listed. And as they're adopted, we will send them out to the staff so that the staff is fully aware that this policy is now into effect. You can go to the website and find it at this particular location. So all of that will be in public view.
Okay,
Just move. Any oppositions?
None here.
Hearing none, seeing none, the motion is passed as read. We move on now to D. D is the consideration of preliminary report from the Louisiana Legislative Auditor. Do we have a motion, is that discussion or anything on this?
Does the superintendent have some comments on this one?
So as I stated in my report, we're very close to finishing up the process with the auditors. Currently, they're in the process of developing their report. And by state law, that work is essentially embargoed until the final report comes out. And so I think that the motion we're looking for is to essentially have a member of the board president work with me to craft our, because part of the report, Appendix A will be the district's response to the legislative auditor's findings. And so, and part of there's district findings, and then there's board findings, and have the board president work with me to develop that document and that Appendix A to submit to the auditors.
So basically, the action here is that the board president will be working on you with an initial response to that preliminary report. But then when the final report comes out, that would come back to the board for full review. Is that correct?
Well, I don't think that the responses would come back, because the report should be final, and part of that final report are our responses, and that will be final prior to the next board meeting.
Right, but I would think that would be an agenda item at the next board meeting. I would think that would be an agenda item at the next board meeting.
So I think the agenda item would be to discuss the final report. I think we should have it by the next, if for some reason there's a delay, then we can, I'll explain that to everybody, but I think that the next, the agenda item for the board would be to discuss the final report. We're going to make it very transparent. We'll even probably have some community meetings around that report to discuss sort of our plans moving forward based on the information we receive.
that we proceed with the item as we just discussed, that board president will work with the superintendent to provide an initial response to that preliminary audit report.
I have a motion for us, a second.
This is Katie, I second it. This is Katie, I second it.
Through superintendent, SSD superintendent to prepare a report. Response to the legislative orders. I mean, not there. And do I have a second to motion finish? Kenny? All opposed? All opposed? Hearing none, seeing none, the motion is passed. The next item on the agenda is the SSA workshop for SSD Board of Development. And I think I will join one of you, Shonda Mark. Thank you all for a wonderful day.
Good afternoon. I know it's been a long morning and we're not into the afternoon. I will take you through this expeditiously as I can, but I do want to allow for input, questions as we go. Because this is a learning exercise for the board. It's designed such. And so please, I would like to invite you to jump in when you will. Back up to the beginning here. My name is Rouge, and I'm one of the partners with SSA Consultants. And it's good to be back with the board. We've done fair amount of work with SSD in the last year or two, and I'm pleased to do this board development session, and we have a second one planned for the August meeting with the board as well. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So we'll start really with the purpose for boards to do board development work. I think these 6 things sort of characterize that. And you see different versions of this for boards, but the characteristics of a great board, first is to clearly understand roles and responsibilities, and there was some good discussion about whose responsibility and role different things were, and we'll cover some of that today. 2, to lead strategically in collaboration with the chief executive, in this case, the superintendent. It is the key relationship in management and governance of an institution, whether it be for-profit or government or non-profit, is that intersection between management and governance is that chief executive in that role. We'll talk about that today as well. 3, effective and efficient board meetings, good process and right information. We'll talk about some of the mechanics of that and some of the options that you have as a board for the administration of your meetings. Work as a team, understand the relevant laws and rules. We'll talk about 2 of those today, two of the most significant ones. And then 5 and 6, commit to continuous learning. And I think that's the most important one. Good boards are better this year than they were last year, and they're not as good as they're going to be next year. And so this is part of that process of continuing to develop. And this is a new board. You've been around less than 2 years, and it's been quite a journey. And as soon as you were seated, we had Hurricane Ida, and then a lot of disruption to deal with, and hopefully, turning that corner with new leadership going forward. And so this is in many ways a sort of a reset, looking at where we are and looking at things that maybe we can do to further develop as a board. We have two laws that we're going to look at and spend our time going through this morning. The first one is the enabling legislation for this board. The special school district, as you know, has been around for a while, any number of years. But this board was just created in 2021. It was, we'll look at the establishment of the board, the membership terms, the authority that you have, the duties and responsibilities that are in that legislation that are specific to the board. And there are some specifics about the superintendent as well in the legislation that describes his responsibilities to the organization and to the board as well. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about the funding mechanisms that are authorized in the law for the special school district. And then secondly, we'll look at the open meeting law in Louisiana, commonly known as the Sunshine Laws. And there are many pieces and parts to that law. We'll talk about the general purpose and application. We'll talk about meeting notices, agendas, meeting requirements, all these things that are part and parcel of that open meeting law. Quorum issues and public participation requirements, as well as the executive sessions, closed executive sessions, when and how to conduct those sessions. So let's look at the enabling legislation. And if you're interested, it's Act number 468 from the 2021 legislative session by the Louisiana legislature, which created this board. And specifically what it did is it transferred the governance responsibility for the special school district from the Department of Education to a board that was created to take its place. And the reason for that was to have representatives of the community served by the special school district more actively engaged in the school and the school system, the school district there. And it is a true governing board. So you have a great deal of authority and responsibility to lead and direct the work of this special school district. As you all well know, members of the board shall not receive any compensation for their hard work, which is pretty common for state boards and commissions. There are, in the legislation, 12 board members described. All of them are subject to Senate confirmation, so individually you have to be approved once you get appointed by the Senate. 11 of the 12 members of this board are appointed by the governor. And one, in this case, Mr. Morris, is appointed by the BESI president, BESI being the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education here in Louisiana. The terms of the members, and this is a little different from a lot of boards in the state, but the terms of the members of the board are concurrent with the appointing authority. So this is especially relevant in this year, which is an election year. So we will have a new election for a governor. We will have a new governor. And your term, your current term, will officially expire when that appointing authority's term expires. But you can serve until someone is appointed in your place, or until you can also be reappointed. All of you serve at the pleasure, too, of the appointing authority. And what that really means is that you can be replaced at any time by the governor, if he's the one who appointed you, or in Mr. Morris's case, the Bessie president. So there's not a fixed term there. You serve at the pleasure of the appointing authority, which ends with when that appointing authority's term ends. And no member of the board can be an employee of the special school. So that's in the law and in our law. The board has 8 specific items in the legislation that is described as the board authority. Things that you specifically have the authority to do as a board. And the first is to accept donations, bequests, and other forms of financial assistance for educational purposes from any public or private person or agency, and comply with the rules and regulations of governing grants from the federal government or from any other person or agency. So you can receive money from the state, obviously, and some of that federal money that comes through the state as well. You can also receive donations and bequests from other sources and take that in as well. The board has the authority to purchase land and equipment and make improvements to facilities as necessary for use of the district in accordance with applicable law. So you can buy the land and equipment that you need and make improvements to the facilities which are planned. We talked about the Rouge here earlier today. Third, you can also lease land and other property belonging to the district at your discretion. So it's a big campus, a lot of buildings, a lot of facilities, and the board has the approval. This has to be subject to the Commissioner of Administration, and there's some detailed laws attached to that, but in general, you have that authority to lease property that belongs to the district at your discretion. Or you can sell or exchange land or other immovable property not needed for the district purposes. So anything that you own, that the district owns, that you as the board decide we might not need this anymore, you could sell it, and you can exchange it for other properties. There's some detail that goes with that, and that you have to comply with, but in general, you have that authority as well. We just talked about rules and regulations and policies of the special school district, and you have the authority to adopt rules, regulations, and policies necessary to conduct the business of the board. And that's an authority, specific authority that you have. Number 6 is you have the authority to award certificates and issue diplomas for successful completion of programs of study, in addition to the regular high school diploma, which is issued by the State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, which is BIS. So they have that authority to issue that high school diploma, but you have the authority to award other certificates and issue diplomas for successful completions of programs of study. 7, you can enter into contracts and agreements which have been recommended by the superintendent in accordance with applicable law with other public agencies. And this is related to or associated with an educational purpose or program affecting education in the district. So you have this authority to enter into agreements with other public entities to further the educational mission of this district at the recommendation of the superintendent. 8 is sort of the umbrella authority to do other things that are necessary for the governance of the district. So it's a broad authority that allows you a fair amount of discretion to do the things that you think need to be done to maintain the mission of the school system. In addition to those authorities, the legislation says the board shall do 6 things. And I think the important word there, and I think the attorneys here hopefully agree, is shall. It means you will do that. And so the first one is to adopt rules, regulations, and policies that are necessary for the efficient operation of the district. So to have that formal adoption of the rules, and the superintendent just talked about a process for y'all to do that. But it is your responsibility to do that adoption. And having said that, I would suggest, and I'm not a lawyer here, so I'm off on the thin ice, but I would suggest that all of the policies that get developed and implemented by the superintendent be brought to the board for an affirmative ratification and adoption, and not do it by exception. I think that would be.
I think that's the most cautious way to do it.
I think that would be the cleanest way to go, and it would also allow for public comment at that point in time as well when you come for that vote.
Can we go ahead and act on that right now? Madam Chair, could we go ahead and act on that right now and offer a motion that the next board meeting, the superintendent provide the board with an update of each of the policies that he has signed off on and get endorsement of the board at that point, as opposed to working by exception?
I really was watching them, so May repeated it so I can catch it again.
Sure. So what I heard Mr. Gomez say was that his recommendation would be that the board would endorse each of the policies that the superintendent has signed off on, as opposed to the board approving those by exception. So currently, the understanding that the board has is that the superintendent will develop policies, sign off on policies, put these policies in place, and share copies of the policies with board members. And then if any board member takes exception to any policy that he has implemented, then the board can take action on those exceptions. Alternatively, the superintendent could bring forward each of the policies that he's put in place for a comment on each one that assures that the board has a thorough review of each individual policy.
And an affirmative vote.
Right.
I think what you're saying is, you have something to say?
I guess just kind of a point of order, this item on our agenda specifically says no public participation or interpretation, so I'm just wondering if we make a motion, we have to allow that. So, maybe our attorneys can answer what action we could take right now during this agenda item.
should open it up for any public comment.
I'm sorry, but are you asking me to rescind the previous motion, or are we going ahead with the motion that we had just a moment ago? There's only one thing that I know of that could happen, is consent. By consent, I think it's in the law, but I think it's in the state law, the revised statute. I'm not sure. Read it all, read, and call in our responses to yes or no.
Yeah, so what I was gonna offer is, that we put a motion on the floor, to change the process for the policy review. We could do that now, or Ms. Polzo's concern is about.
Okay, you want a motion to review the policies?
Individually, as opposed to by exception.
Now, or at the next meeting?
It would be as the superintendent develops and implements those policies. So it would be between now and the next meeting, he would develop and implement those policies. So at the next board meeting, our motion would have him to review each of those policies with the board.
Let's see. Review each policy. Randy Morrison has on the floor a motion to review each policy at the next meeting. Is that correct? Do I have a second? Fanny seconded.
Public comment.
Dr. Martin, you have?
Just a question. So I just want to make sure that once we develop the policy and I sign it, it is in effect until the next meeting, correct?
Yes.
Okay, we just have to have these policies in effect, because right now we don't really have a whole lot of stuff in effect. And then we can put them, we can batch them, essentially what you're saying is we batch them, and the policies developed between board members, between board meetings would be batched. And then if there are any, you would then approve all of those policies at the next meeting, and then we can also talk about any changes that might need to be made.
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect.
I'm not sure there's any public
So,
comment.
your motion still stand. Any more comments, discussion? All in opposition, please raise your hand. No one opposed, it's passed. Ms. Carter?
I got it. Thank you. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
All right. I apologize for taking y'all down that road, but I think it'd be the cleanest way, given the legislation, to have the board adopt formatively or not in any policy there. So number two is you shall determine the eligibility for applicants for enrollment. So you have control over that, and you adopt that criteria that determines who can be enrolled in the special school district. Third, you prescribe and select for use the free textbooks and other materials of instruction. Four, you enter into an agreement as recommended by the district superintendent with the city, parish, or other public school system to participate in educational and academic programs or courses. Fifth, you select the superintendent, as you just did recently, who shall be the chief administrative officer of the district and who shall administer the rules, regulations, and policies adopted by the board. So he is your employee, and And the one employee that you manage is the superintendent. And then 6, to elect from your membership, and we just talked about this, the officers, a president, vice president, a secretary treasurer, and you can add other officers as you will. If you want to add additional officers, you can. Whatever you think is necessary, you can create officer positions and elect additional officers. But you have to have at least those 3. The superintendent. These are, and all of these things that we're going through here are excerpts, exact excerpts from your legislation. So there is a section in that legislation that talks about the superintendent and the superintendent's role and responsibilities under the leadership of the board. And it says the board shall delegate to the superintendent such of its powers and duties as it deems appropriate to aid the superintendent in the efficient administration of his responsibility for the implementation of the policies of the board. And the superintendent shall be responsible for all the administrative functions, duties, and needs of the board, including, but not limited to the following. So, it is and I want to make a point of this, it's the superintendent's responsibility to take care of all the administrative needs of the board. So what you need to administer the board, you should make clear to the superintendent so he can attend to those needs there. And I think as this board got started, that was probably not done. And not clearly established what the needs of the board is, and therefore what should the superintendent provide. But it is written in the legislation that it is the superintendent's responsibility to provide whatever administrative needs that the board has in place, and it then describes a set of things that are included in the administration. One is preparing an annual budget necessary for the continued operation of the district, and submitting that budget to the board for adoption. So preparing the budget and presenting it to the board for adoption, superintendent's responsibility. Paying the salaries and expenses for all the facilities, equipment, supplies, faculty, the staff, out of the appropriated funds that the district has. And to pay for all of the operating and administrative expenses of the board and the district. So any expense that the board will need to incur for its administrative responsibilities should be in the budget, there should be budget items for that, and it should be the responsibility for that to be developed and taken care of through the paying of expenses through the district. The superintendent must exercise budgetary responsibility in allocating for expenditure by the district all the monies appropriated or otherwise made available to the district. Developing and annually updating the student handbook. That includes all of the rules and regulations and policies for discipline of students, and submitting such handbook to the board for consideration and adoption. So every year, the board should adopt an updated version of that handbook. E is determining faculty and staff positions necessary. So it's the superintendent's responsibility to decide how much staff we need and how to organize that staff for the efficient operation of the district, and selecting the personnel for those positions as well. funding. So the special school district, unlike a lot of all of the local school districts in Louisiana, does not have any taxing authority. And as you know, most of all of our local public school systems have two central sources of revenue. One is local taxes, and the other is money they get through the state, primarily through the minimum foundation. But this school district, being a statewide school district, in the law that enables you, it specifically says you have no authority to levy any tax of your own, like those local school districts do. So the funding from the state comes from two primary sources. One is the general fund, which is the legislature every year appropriates the money that's available in the general fund, and they allocate it however they will to all the different entities that require it. And that's an annual process. The other source of funding is called the Minimum Foundation Program, which is a complicated formula, but it's a dedicated amount of money that comes into the state every year, and the formula dictates what school system gets what amount of money, and the special school district is part of that Minimum Foundation Program, and so you get your allocation of that money the way, in the same way that all the other local public school systems do. And those are the two primary sources of revenue for the district. A couple of things that in the funding section of your legislation, they talk about the budget and the nature of the budget that you are to adopt every year. It says the budget shall have as its goal to provide state funding that shall not be less than the average funding on a per student basis as peer institutions in other states. So that really sort of puts the onus on you to figure out what that is, what those peer states, what their average per student basis is, and to propose a budget that's in that range.
I have a question on that one.
Yes.
So with regard to the timeline for budgeting, the legislature is currently considering the general fund, and this group is included in the general fund budgeting. So I'm not aware of any budget that's been brought to this board for consideration. Can you comment on that?
I cannot. I don't know if a budget's been brought to this board or not.
So,
I think the budget is due to the budget office sometime around the end of October. And so that's when it should be adopted prior to that. We may have to look at having a special board meeting around budget time to review the budget and adopt the budget. So I don't know what happened prior, but moving forward for the next budget cycle, obviously, House Bill 1 is already in the works now and being discussed in the legislature. So I think moving forward, we'll have to look at our meeting schedule, and because it will take probably, we'll work heavy on budget in September and October to have it ready for the end of October for that. That's my understanding of when it's due.
Yes.
So we'll need to meet prior to that so that I can propose the budget and you guys can vote on it.
So if I understand correctly, it was a missed opportunity for this year.
Yes.
And what we're talking about now would be for going forward for next year.
Right, yeah, the ship has already sailed, I think, on House Bill 1, with the budget. It's done, so we were cut 10 positions at about $1 million. that was associated with those positions this year.
So it would be good for this board to know that ahead of time, right?
Yeah, there's no, I don't think there's any way to go back and discuss it at this point. It's already been submitted.
So it's good this board understands now what that process is, so that we don't have that reoccurrence.
Yeah, so, yeah, we will work that process out, and I think by next board meeting, we can probably have a a better idea. And again, I'm still learning what the cycle is for the state here, right? So, I'll have a pretty firm understanding what the cycle is at that point, and we can decide on the process then.
Great, thank you.
This is Sherry. I have a question for you.
Ms. Barnes?
You're saying that the budget plan is the month of October. Does that then apply to that next fiscal year?
Right, yes, so what happens in October then would go for the next fiscal year. So it would go to the legislature for that next House Bill 1, and then move forward from there.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yes, and that is the cycle in Louisiana for all the state agencies, that they are asked to put together budgets for the next fiscal year, and typically the end of October is that deadline, and that's so that the legislature can begin working on putting together their bill, and the new administration, the governor's office, where the governor's budget is put together too, and so they have a couple of months to work, so that when the legislature goes into session, they've got all the budgets from the agencies, and they can look at them before the legislature starts, and then HB 1 gets voted on, and whatever comes out of that is out of the general fund, at least we can put together. But that's the cycle, and again, in the law, it specifies that in putting together your budget, there should be this multi-stage to make sure that we're relatively on par with peer institutions, at least, in putting that budget together, and then submitted it to the division administration, which is what all the
So we would look for the superintendent to provide us that information, so we
Yes.
can have some comparative analysis.
Yeah, and it is, as mentioned earlier here, it's the superintendent's responsibility to put that budget together and present it to the board. It is your responsibility to adopt the budget and sign off on one, and then to submit. Okay.
This is Sherry. I have a question. My concern about the budget planning is that we meet every 3 months. And the budget planning occurs in October. If we're meeting in August, that's a pretty good bit of time in there. Is there any way we could do it early in August?
I'd like to sort of broaden that question and suggest that the board look at its whole calendar, and it's a recommendation I made to the superintendent that he proposed to the board after discussion with y'all a calendar that would, an annual calendar that would better fit the needs and requirements of the board. To your point, because I think you're right. It kind of puts you in a bind. August probably too early to adopt the board a budget, and November's too late.
Right. So we might need to change our calendar.
Right. And I was going to make some suggestions at the end of this to that point. And then the last thing about funding is the special school district may enter into purchase of service agreements or contracts with other public or non-public agencies to provide special education and related services. So you have, again, that contract and agreement capability. All right, so that's the enabling legislation for the SSD. I'm going to jump to the open meetings law, which is an elaborate law. Has many different pieces and parts, and I've excerpted some pieces of it to go through with you that I thought were most relevant and useful to you at this moment. So as you know, the open meetings law was created to make sure that government was as open as possible, that the public could hear and see and understand what government was doing. And not only could it be available and access what government was doing, but it could comment and provide input to government entities before they acted, before they officially acted and voted on things. There would be opportunity for the public to participate. And in this public meetings law, it says no person shall be denied the right to observe the deliberations of public bodies and examine public documents, except in specific cases established by the law. Otherwise, we want to have open access to the citizens of this state. The open meetings law applies to meetings of any public body, including this one. So unless you're expressly excluded from the open meetings law, you're subject to it, and this body is. The law applies to any official committee of the public body that has been delegated any of these functions of the public body, or any unofficial committee or gathering of the body. So it's pretty broad. When the board meets, that's a public meeting. If a committee of the board meets and there's a quorum and it's an official meeting, it has to be an open meeting. Even unofficial advisory groups that gather would be considered. So you want to be pretty broad in your understanding and your application of that law. But it does not apply to any chance meetings or social gatherings of the members. So if you all accidentally wound up in one place for some reason, at some social event, and with no purpose to do business, then that's not a violation because you all wound up in a room somewhere. But as long as you don't start talking business or conducting votes or taking polls of the members, as long as you don't engage as a board or as members of the board, then those incidental social gatherings would not constitute meetings. So, quorum issues. As a general rule, members, and you're included in this, simple majority of the board is a quorum. And so for this board, it's 7 members. You have to have 7 members. You have 12 seats, and you have to count all the seats, even if some of the seats are empty. In other words, if you don't have someone appointed in all the seats, even if you only have 11 or 10 members appointed, you have a 12-member board, and you're going to have 7 members present to be a quorum. The vacant positions must be counted. And no official action may be undertaken by the body in the absence of a quorum. There is also something called a walking quorum. And for the purposes of this board, it is in which some members leave the meeting and different members enter the meeting, precluding the physical presence of an actual quorum, but resulting in an actual quorum over the course of the discussion. So what you can't do is sort of shuffle in and out to avoid having a quorum and have, any sort of discussion as a board in sort of trying to circumvent the quorum rules. That's called a walking quorum. You can't do that. And you also cannot do that electronically. See that last bullet there? By email or other electronic means. You can't start talking to one another over the email and everybody periodically jumping in and all that. That would constitute a walking quorum.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. Does that apply to proxies as well? So if a board member could not make it, if they had a proxy to attend the meeting for them, is that allowed?
Not as an official count of a member being present. You can't have proxies. You could send somebody if you can't attend, and if there is a quorum, they could still have a meeting, and that person can listen in and report back to you, but you can't have a proxy that serves in your place.
And that person would not count in the quorum?
No, they would not count the quorum.
I see. I understand.
Notices, meeting notices. So there must be a written public notice of any official meeting of the board or any of its committees. If the meeting is a regular meeting, then it's established by law, resolution, or ordinance, so the written public notice must be given at the beginning of each calendar year and no later than 24 hours, exclusive of the weekends and legal holidays, before the regular special or rescheduled meeting. So that's just the requirements of posting and announcing.
Mr. Jerry, you were talking about a notice of intent that has to be sent 24 hours ahead of time. Does that apply to the agenda being posted as well?
No less than 24 hours. Before the meeting.
So that really doesn't work for us because we have some blind individuals who need to have the materials printed in Braille. We need to do this at least 3 weeks prior to the meeting, have it posted, so that then we can get the materials produced in Braille for them to be able to read.
Yeah, and there's no prohibition of doing it earlier, but the law is, the open meetings law has that requirement.
But sometimes we don't follow that. It's just 1 week's notice and it's too close and there's no time to get the materials printed in Braille. And it's not fair for some of the board members. How can we get it set so that it is 3 weeks prior to a meeting?
I would adopt the rule and policy of this board to dictate when that happens.
Okay.
So, Sandy, wouldn't that would be an ADA accommodation, right? I mean, because we have to follow the ADA, we're a public body, so if this is needed for public participation, then that would be an ADA accommodation.
And I don't know.
Well, what Rudy's pointing out is the minimum. The notice has to be posted
website and on the door, so to speak, of the meeting place at least 24 hours ahead of time. But there's certainly nothing that would prohibit this board from adopting a policy that materials be available for translation into Braille 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever you want.
Right.
Yeah, and I would do it that way.
And I agree with you. It would be a requirement of the ADA that you
But that way you can set it in whatever time you want.
Just use the other mic.
That would be, and that's how. It's also a requirement that if you have a website, and you do, that it be posted there as well with the same lead time. Meeting agendas. The public notice must have the agenda attached to it. And each item on the agenda should be listed separately and described with reasonable specificity so that the public can understand the business that's being taken on. So you don't want to just do superintendent's report, old business, new business. That doesn't quite. And if you look at your agenda, I think it's quite good. There's good specificity as to what the business that you took on and did today is. And it's required that it be posted that way. The agenda shall not be changed less than 24 hours prior to the scheduled time of the meeting. Adding items to an agenda at the meeting itself requires unanimous approval of the members present. So if you want to, you can add an item once you get into a meeting, but it requires a unanimous approval. So if one member disagrees, then you can't add. Any motion for a vote to add an item to the agenda shall include with reasonable specificity the subject matter of the additional item and the purpose for adding the item to it. The board may also remove, table, or withdraw any agenda items that are when they get into the meeting, and that just requires the majority of the members present. So you can get to the meeting and say, well, let's just not take that one up. And if you get a majority vote of the board, you can postpone and table.
Rudy?
Yes.
Can I make one comment? Right here.
Yeah, oh, yes.
If the board is going to add by unanimous vote an additional agenda item, i.e. an item that was not on the posted agenda, they have to allow for public comment. That's the only note. You can add things that aren't on the agenda with unanimous vote, but then you have to, before you begin whatever you're going into, allow for public comment. Every time.
Yeah, every time.
That's a motion, right? That's a motion.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, so you would have to do. Good point, thank you.
For every motion, for each motion?
Yes, for each motion that would add a new agenda item would require the public comment. Because it's a new item. There's public comment allowed before any vote on every agenda item. And so if you're adding a new agenda item, then the same rule follows regarding public comment.
So before the public body, the board in this case, they take action on an item, the presiding officer or designee shall read aloud the description of the item. Members must vote viva voce. Did I say that right? The attorneys up in the room, viva voce. By voice. And this requirement has been determined to require the physical presence of a member and prohibits submission of votes in writing by absent members, vote via telephone. Members are not allowed proxies unless specifically afforded this right by specific statute, and that is not in your statute. So you can't do that, and you may not ever vote voting by secret ballot. The viva voce requirements also precludes voting by a show of hands alone. So you typically want to have an affirmative vote by the individual members. Yes or no?
This is Bailey.
Yes.
Can y'all hear me?
Thank you. So as we're going through this, what I'm seeing is problems in the legislation that established this board, which I've been saying for a while now. But like, just for something like this, like you said, it's not allowed, so for instance, a proxy. Given the statewide nature of our board and that many of us are representatives of specific organizations, like I think that's something maybe moving forward that we could reconsider of maybe trying to get some of the changes to legislation. So for instance, I'm the representative for the Governor's Office of Disability Affairs. If I wasn't in here, I could have my assistant director be here, and then you wouldn't have quorum issues, or there's other people here that represents offices. And so I think that that's something that should be looked at among other things in regards to the legislation that established this board.
So this is not the legislation that establishes the board. This is the Sunshine Law legislation that is going on right now. So we have to probably get a carve out on that.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So that he's saying that we don't have that specific for our statute. But that could be something that would help us to have a,
And that would be the only way you could have it. You would literally have to amend your legislation and get a
Well,
carve out.
just the part about the show of hands is not really any compliant. For a deaf individual would use their hands to show affirmative.
And I think the point there is for each individual to declare what their intentions are, and to not just have this group vote, whether it be by voice or hands or otherwise. It's the idea of you've got 7 members here, 7 members vote individually, and specifically in time. I think that would be the cleanest way just to do it. And this is a small board, so it wouldn't be a burden for y'all to do that each and every time. If you had a big board, if you had 30 members, and it can get long, voting can get long, but you don't really have that problem. Okay. Public participation. So the purpose of open meetings is to allow individuals to observe and participate. Public bodies must provide an opportunity for public comment prior to action on an agenda item on which a vote is to be taken. So anything you're going to vote on, you got to create an opportunity for public input. And the governing body, as you have, can adopt reasonable rules and restrictions regarding the public comment period. So you don't have to stand here for hours and hours. And people don't have an unlimited amount of time they can speak to things. You can create reasonable rules and constraints on time there. A similar obligation is imposed for school boards, except that public comment must occur prior to taking any vote. It must occur before each topic and not at the beginning of the meeting. So as you do currently, right, when an item is brought up, before you vote, public comment is available. And then executive session. So there is some limits to the public meeting, the openness, and that there is some opportunity for boards to have closed meetings that are not open, closed sessions, if you will, that are not open to the public. And the valid reasons for going into executive session are these. One, to discuss character, professional competence, physical and mental health of a person, so the HR issue. Strategy sessions or negotiations with respect to collective bargaining or prospective litigation, after formal written demand or litigation when an open meeting would have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body. So if there's a lawsuit pending and your attorney needs to talk to the board about a suit, where do we go from here? You can do that in executive session. Third, discussions regarding the report, development, or course of action for security personnel in plan. So you don't want to talk about all your security in public. That might compromise security. So you're allowed to do that in executive session as well. Investigating proceedings regarding allegations of misconduct. Again, can be done in executive session. Cases of extraordinary emergency, limited to natural disaster, threat of epidemic, civil disturbances, suppression of insurrections, the repelling of invasions, and other matters similar magnitude. So under extreme conditions, extraordinary emergency, the board can be without that public requirement. And then finally, discussions between the city or parish school board and individual students or the parents or tutors of those students. There is a very specific process that you have to go through to go into executive session. You need a vote of 2/3 of the members present to vote to go into executive session. If the public body wishes to take up an item for which executive session is authorized but which was not published on the agenda, the public body must first have a unanimous vote to add the item to the agenda. So you've got to add the item to the agenda with a unanimous vote. And then you have to have a second vote with 2/3 approval to go into, to take that item into executive session. So you have to have 2 votes if you're adding an item and then you want to go into executive session on that item. You may not go into executive session for any reason that is not specifically an authorized exception. So the ones that are on that list can go into executive session for any other reason. And the executive session must be strictly and solely for that exception. You don't want to drift in your conversation and kind of talk about other items or preview other items. You want to stick to that very one narrow thing that you're in the executive session for. General matters or matters tangential to that authorized exception may not be discussed. And no votes are ever taken in the executive session. Remember, votes are taken in public, and the public gets to comment before you vote. So if we don't vote, we don't say how we're going to vote in executive session either. You don't want to do that. You don't want to sort of alert everyone as to how you're going to vote. You can can have discussions, you can tell people what you think, but you don't want a preview of them. That's it. That's the presentation. Do you have any questions about open meeting law? Any of that? Any of that trying to feel those?
This is Maria. This is Maria speaking. I'm just going to back up to the beginning when you were talking about our term of office for each of the members here.
Yes.
So when we get a new governor, will our term of office be done at that point?
Technically, it will be done, but you will be allowed to stay in your position until you are replaced. So if the new governor does not replace you, then you can stay in your board seat until that happens, or until that governor would maybe reappoint you. But if the new governor would want to replace you, then when as soon as they did, then your term would end.
I see. That's interesting. Okay. This is Sherry. So there are 4 sections for board training, is that right? There are 4 sections, or were there 3? 2? Okay.
It was
So the
4 hours.
Oh, a total of 4 hours. Okay, so the next training is going to be in August,
In August.
and what will the topic be?
I wanted to ask y'all about that. We were going to talk about Robert's Rules of Order, which you are subject to if and when Roberts does not conflict with the open meeting requirements. Then you're supposed to use Robert's Rules of Order, so we were going to do some of that. But I would also take any suggestions you may have, topic-wise, or things that we would want to focus on.
I had suggested a death sensitivity training. Will that occur?
I don't know how to do that. And I think it's a good idea, but...
You can get in touch with LCD, and there are resources that they have to provide that training, correct, Bambi?
I think that's beyond the scope of what we're doing with their organization. Like, we could get another, deaf cultural organization to do that type of training, which I think would be most
Maybe
appropriate.
a great idea.
Okay,
But we could,
okay. Yeah, there are different, diversity, maybe we have some diversity training. Kenny, say?
More questions?
I do have, could I have one more minute, please? I would, in going through all of this and looking at the board documents and being around the board and this organization for the last year, there are a couple of things that I would suggest. And I've had this conversation with the superintendent recently. The board currently has very little structure to it. It has a personnel committee, but otherwise, to my knowledge, it has no other committees. And I think it would be a good thing for the superintendent to look at the needs and to suggest back to the board a committee structure. That would include descriptions of committees and roles. Keeping in mind that you only have 12 members on your board, so you don't want to have 6 committees. But I think that would be something, as well as the roles for those committees. I think that would be good, and the meeting cycle, I think, for the board and for the committees, I think could use a fresh look and suggest, right now you're meeting 4 times a year, but you can meet however many times you want, and however many times you need, and to have the superintendent, again, look at the calendar, look at the budget cycle, look at some of the other important things, to develop an annual calendar for y'all, so that you have an understanding of repetitive annual things, when we're gonna do them during the year, and if he thinks that the calendar meeting should be adjusted, to recommend that to you as well. It is the superintendent's responsibility to tend to all the administrative needs of this board. And I talked to him about, getting with members and identifying all the needs. We talked today about the taking of the minutes and all. That is a responsibility to sign those minutes and other official documents that usually falls to the secretary of the board. But I've worked for a lot of state boards, and in none of them are actual board members taking minutes. And so those are examples of administrative functions, the putting together the agenda and the administering of the meeting itself. I think to get a recommendation from the superintendent about how to do all those things and create an opportunity for y'all to sort of create processes and procedures that would allow for the efficient sort of planning and development of board meetings, and then the administration of those meetings as well. There are some functions that the board chair or the temporary board chair has to do, but outside of that, the administrator can really help run and administer the meeting and the preparation of the materials and the setup of the agenda and all those sorts of things. So I would suggest that he prepare thoughts and ideas about that and present that back to the board along with that annual calendar and the board structures. Y'all talked about policies and procedures and the process for that. I also think that it would be good if a board member guidebook was developed and available, one for sitting board members, but also for onboarding of new board members, and for it to include a number of things, enabling legislation for this board, the open meetings law, relevant stuff, the committee structures and roles, the board administration process and procedures, with listed staff resources, and Robert's Rules of Order summary sheets, which we'll pick up next time, and other things that you think of. I think the board has some bylaws. I'm not sure about that, but I think the board may have its own set of bylaws, and if it does, yes. To look at that and to examine that, whether that may need to be updated, but to include that in the guidebook and to set up an onboarding process for new board members. Because it's a big responsibility you have. It's a complicated organization. It's quite a complicated organization. And to onboard new board members, I think would be a very useful thing to do, because you do not need that often, even if you change your meeting structure a lot, to sort of get up to speed as soon as possible. Thank you so much.
So I just have a couple more things. You talked about the proxies. I also think that the issue about the term limits ending, the terms ending when the appointing authority ends, that causes a lot of problems for a board like ours. I mean, we essentially could all be gone in January, and there's no continuity.
Right.
So there's some really big issues about this legislation. I know I was there as we was going through the process. Another part was that there's some definite descriptions of who is on this board, but then during the process, someone put an amendment saying we had to have representation from every region of the state. which limits who you can have. For instance, I didn't have anyone in my office, including myself, for a period of time that lived in any region that wasn't being represented. So I had to have my former employee remain on this board because I have a small staff. So like, those are the type of issues that I think was good intention, because they wanted to have geographic representation, but I think there's some things that need to be done with the legislation. And so as we move through the rest of this year, I think that needs to be looked at and potentially addressed with the legislator to see if we need to make some changes to that legislation in the next legislative session.
Yeah, and if I'll just comment on that a second, it's very typical for new entities. They get set up a certain way, and then a year or two down the road, the board goes, this doesn't work that well, and this is problematic, and this is hard to do, and then I think it would be good to have that process and look at things that y'all might want to try and address and change in legislation. But I would, as you know, be well prepared when you do that. Because when you open up a statute, then you're opening it up for everybody. Anybody and everybody who wants to change something about your legislation gets a free shot when you open up a legislation. And that just means you have to be prepared. You have to have your arguments together. You have to have the reasoning together. You have to have a good sponsor who carry those changes and update them. And it happens on a fairly regular basis, but you just want to be prepared with your arguments for the changes. But I think that would be a good process.
I have one point, Rudy.
Mm-hmm.
You had mentioned on potential topics for August.
Yes.
I think a good one would in fact be the bylaws of this board.
Okay.
Covers a lot of ground, and I know that we could, going through that, we could submit how you want each meeting basically to be run. How do you want your agendas to look? That's how you're going to start getting control of your board, through your own bylaws. Just I say take a hard look at these and understand what they are. And in doing that, you're going to be able to see, well, what do I want to change or tweak to make this process easier and smoother going forward?
I think that's good. We'll add that to Robert's.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anybody more?
I just said thank you for his presentation. Madam Chair, before we adjourn, I did have a couple of really quick comments. I wanted to request the superintendent, if you would, to work with the board president on the next agenda so that we we have an agenda item that would formally add a roll call vote, the pledge, and the invocation to the agenda for every meeting. So if our superintendent would work with the president to put that on the next agenda, I would appreciate it. The roll call vote, the pledge, and the invocation. So that we have that on every agenda going forward. And then my second request was that the superintendent would work with council to see if we can't get some sort of estimate for what it would cost to have a court reporter present to record the minutes of the meeting. And that way the board could give some consideration to that as an alternative to give those responsibilities to the elected secretary treasurer.
Right. They recorded that. Thank you. Okay. Are there any more comments? Because I think we can adjourn now. Okay, who can you hear me now? Sorry about windows in the past, I had problems calling bingo numbers, so now I'm still having problems. Sorry about that. Anyway, we're ready to adjourn today. It has been a wonderful day. I really want to especially say thank you to Katie and Jennifer who really worked with me. I want to thank all of you who worked with me. And I want to thank you all for being here and working with me. Thank you. Have a wonderful week. And the oh, when I'm tired, the interpreter, we look at the motion out there. Thank y'all.
Those interested in seeing the track, the new track, Amy Jones, my assistant, will take you over there. Ronnie, you can go head over to
We need a motion to adjourn in a second.
Motion to adjourn. Motion.
Bonnie has a motion to adjourn, second by